You are probability. Surfing the Matrix. Desultory Decussation. I enjoyed reading Elliot Benjamin's intriguing essay, License Plate Synchronicity, because he vividly shows how seemingly random outer events can coincide with our personal wants and needs, creating powerful intersections. In his conclusion, Benjamin suggests that such synchronicities may serve as a reminder that there is indeed inherent spirituality in the universe that cannot be explained by our rational scientific technological minds or brains. While I acknowledge that unusual occurrences can be interpreted in supermundane or spiritual ways, it does not necessarily follow that these events spring from something beyond our rational framework. Indeed, even the most apparently miraculous synchronicities may be rooted in mathematics. The probability that any two events will intersect in significant ways is higher than we often suspect. The central issue here is our ability to notice how probabilities unfold in our lives, moment by moment, hour by hour, day after day. John Sir Littlewood, a renowned mathematician of the 20th century and a senior wrangler at Cambridge University, studied the theory of large numbers. During extensive research, often in partnership with his more famous colleague G.H. Hardy, Littlewood discovered remarkable properties in large numbers that seem unusually odd at first glance. One of these curiosities is what came to be known as Littlewood's law of miracles. Writing in the New York Review of Books, Freeman Dyson explains, Littlewood's law of miracles states that in the course of any normal person's life, miracles happen at a rate of roughly 1 per month. The proof is straightforward. When we are awake and actively engaged, about 8 hours each day, we see and hear things happening at roughly 1 event per second. That means we experience about 30,000 events per day, or about 1 million per month. Most events do not feel miraculous because they are insignificant. The chance of a miracle is about 1 in 1 million events. Therefore, on average, we should expect 1 miracle to happen every month. Broch tells stories of surprising coincidences that occurred to him and his friends, all easily explained by Littlewood's law. Another commentator on the internet sums it up. The law of truly large numbers states, with a large enough sample, any outrageous thing is likely to happen. If a rare event, say 1 in 1 million, occurs in a population of 250 million people, we'll see 250 such occurrences each day, adding up to nearly 100,000 per year. Over a lifetime, and if you enlarge the population to 5 billion, the rough world population, when these ideas were first discussed, you can be absolutely sure that astonishing events will happen. When they do, people record them, and if it happens to you or someone you know, it's hard to avoid that spooky feeling. A related concept helps explain Elliot Benjamin's experiences. I call it desultory decussation, 2 seemingly random events crossing to form an X. If we regard our lives as streams of thousands, indeed millions of individual events in fractal-like patterns, then for every 10,000 or more events, at least 2 of them are likely to intersect. If you spot that intersection, you'll see a meaningful coincidence, in the sense that 2 unrelated elements share some noteworthy commonality. Extending this further, one might generalize that some of us look or even hunt for these desultory decussations, while others do not. It's plausible that certain individuals have a heightened awareness of these chance overlaps, giving them a more consistent sense of meaningful coincidence, even if, relatively speaking, the frequency of coincidences is the same for everyone. In other words, some people plunge right into Littlewood's stream of possible coincidences, while others stand on the bank. Certainly, blind typing can produce a sensible word occasionally, but the trick is to be aware of the probability when it finally appears. Without that mindfulness, countless remarkable instances of chance pass completely unnoticed. If we could remain alert to this mathematical matrix, we might experience breathtaking hierophanies, not only monthly, but perhaps daily. The theory of large numbers supports this possibility. The main obstacle lies in ourselves. Truly embracing Littlewood miracles, or desultory decussations, random events forming meaningful X-shapes, requires a Herculean effort to stay open to whatever odd coincidences nature throws our way. Littlewood's law, interestingly, demands especially keen attention. Elliot Benjamin's license plate experiment illustrates this nicely. A modified version of Littlewood's law, akin to desultory decussation, might account for these anomalous synchronicities. We would not need spiritual or paranormal theories to explain them. The sheer improbability of some events can blind us to the chance-based reality that such events can occur, no matter how rare they may seem. Note: the law was presented by Cambridge University Professor J. E. Littlewood in A Mathematician's Miscellany. It aims to debunk alleged supernatural phenomena and relates to the broader law of truly large numbers, which states that with a sufficiently large sample, even the most seemingly outrageous outcomes are likely. Littlewood defines a miracle as an exceptional event of great significance that occurs at a frequency of 1 in a million. He calculates that when a person is awake and alert for about 8 hours a day, that person registers roughly one event per second, whether it is exceptional or ordinary, e.g., noticing a computer screen, a keyboard, a book, etc. As a result, in 35 days, an individual will have encountered approximately 1,008,000 events. Accepting this definition of a miracle, Littlewood concludes that one might expect a miracle about once every 35 days, making such occurrences seem surprisingly commonplace. Adapted from the Wikipedia entry on Littlewood's law. 2. Apophenia and the intentionality fallacy. The theory of probabilities is basically common sense reduced to calculation. It allows us to analyze precisely what insightful minds instinctively sense, but cannot always explain. Pierre-Simon Laplace. I admire Elliot Benjamin's attempts to defend his belief in mysterious synchronicities and to clarify why his personal examples do not seem explained by Littlewood's law of miracles or desultory decussation alone. In fact, I partially agree with him. Yet, a close reading of his license plate accounts reveals a simpler, more fundamental explanation. Contrary to Benjamin's conclusions, the evidence clearly shows that the so-called spiritual intersections are largely driven by his intention to find meaning in otherwise random events. Put bluntly, Elliot projects and transfers his private intentions onto license plate letters and numbers, then interprets them as special markers or signs. We humans do this regularly. Pattern seeking is woven into our nature. We are driven to find patterns in almost anything, including random happenings. Michael Shermer, founder of Skeptic magazine and author of Why People Believe in Weird Things, observes, "Humans are pattern-seeking, storytelling animals. We look for and uncover patterns in our environment and our lives, then form narratives around those patterns to give them meaning. Myths, religions, histories, and sciences are all born from this impulse. Sometimes we discover actual patterns, like DNA, as the foundation of heredity, or the fossil record as Earth's living past. But sometimes our minds impose patterns rather than uncover them, like the famous face on Mars, just an eroded mountain, or the image of the Virgin Mary on a glass building in Florida, really an oil stain from a palm tree. The crucial challenge is separating genuine patterns from illusions. Thomas Kuhn called it the essential tension between skepticism and credulity. A careful look at the first four license plate synchronicities Elliot Benjamin describes tells us more about his personal way of looking at the world than about any other worldly process. Ironically, the math he uses to demonstrate their improbability is itself misleading. Here, probability is irrelevant, because the central factor is his pattern seeking. This is an example of the intentionality fallacy, where subjective needs and desires become attached to outward events, leading us to believe that external reality is literally aligning itself with our inner states. Elliot Benjamin has not tapped into a cosmic or divine intelligence surpassing rational science. He has simply stumbled upon how easily human neurology gets confused with objective ontology, and then labels the result beyond current scientific explanation. Equally important are the details Elliot leaves out, because within them we may see how intentionality, not some heavenly agent, drives events. Richard Feynman famously stressed the need for researchers to highlight details that might undermine their findings or offer alternate perspectives. In his 1974 Cargo Cult Science speech at Caltech, Feynman said, "It's a kind of scientific integrity, a principle of thought akin to sheer honesty, where one leans over backward. Suppose you're doing an experiment. You must report everything that could invalidate it, not only what seems correct. You have to include other causes that might explain your results, or show how you ruled them out. You must let your audience see all the details, including those that conflict with your interpretation. If you propose a theory and publicize it, you should also present all facts that disagree with it, so others can evaluate it properly." The intentionality game. Elliot's first example of what he claims cannot be explained by our rational scientific technological minds or brains is: a few days ago, while agonizing about recently losing one of my mental health jobs, I noticed a license plate reading ACT. This immediately reminded me of acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, Hayes, Strossal, and Wilson, 2004. A method in which you learn to mindfully accept your life's disappointments, then commit to actualizing your deepest values anyway. Seeing ACT felt like a meaningful reinforcement to accept the job loss with grace and return to my true calling of working with mental health clients, even if I didn't earn real income from it. Breaking it down, Elliot describes his emotional state, agonizing over losing one of his jobs. Suddenly, he sees a license plate ACT. He interprets these three letters as a direct reference to acceptance and commitment therapy. A neutral observer sees little beyond a simple trio of letters. It is Elliot who ascribes meaning to them, connecting them to his ACT workshop and thus seeing personal significance. The letters themselves do not clearly indicate acceptance and commitment therapy to an onlooker. It's Elliot's projection that constructs this link. While I can appreciate that he found comfort in seeing ACT at a time of need, it doesn't necessarily represent a metaphysical synchronicity. Indeed, kids find meaningful words in random letter arrangements at school, but they don't typically consider them miraculous. We might ask, were the letters exactly ACT alone, or were there adjacent letters or numbers? Did Elliot glance at other plates and ignore them? If so, are those misses? Such questions become irrelevant if the real story is Elliot's subjective tendency to impose significance on three letters on a metal plate. Next, let's see if Benjamin's second example stands out more clearly. I finished teaching my son and his friends about perfect numbers, disclosing that 496 is the third perfect number and is also in my email address. Minutes later, as my son drove me and a friend home, the car in front of us had a license plate reading 496. We were all quite amused by this unmistakable coincidence. We want to ask, was 496 displayed by itself, or part of a larger code like T496ZP. Details matter. Eliot perceives these 3 digits as extraordinary, but from a neutral viewpoint, it might not be so miraculous. People see special numbers daily, but typically don't attribute metaphysical meaning. Eliot's attachment to 496 might highlight his pattern-seeking mind, rather than an otherworldly message. He could just as easily have found 28, 6, or 43, and drawn significance from any of them. Continuing, Eliot shares 2 more examples. Last week Dorothy, my significant other, and I went camping for her birthday. On the return drive, I realized she was almost exactly twice my son Jeremy's age. She turned 58 2 days after Jeremy turned 29. While heading to my weekly tennis match 2 days after Dorothy's birthday, I noticed the car next to me had the plate 2958. By this point, we might suspect apophenia, which is the experience of seeing meaningful connections in random data. As Sandra L. Hubscher notes, randomness sometimes contains patterns. We focus on and magnify these patterns. Eliot seems to resist acknowledging how often these coincidences arise naturally, given our innate ability to detect patterns, even if they're illusory. Michael Shermer, who first coined patternicity, wrote in Scientific American, 2008, "Scientists traditionally treat patternicity as an error, a type I error or false positive, believing something is real when it is not. Our brains are belief engines that connect the dots. We do not have built-in checks to distinguish true from false patterns. That's why science needs replication and peer review. Such false positives are rarely fatal, so they persist in our species. Sometimes these connections are genuinely startling, often far more so than Eliot's examples, but that doesn't compel us to conclude a divine agent is at work. Eliot is not alone in experiencing such coincidences. We all do. It's just that he, like many, interprets them in spiritual or transmundane terms. Meanwhile, the real drivers are chance and the mind's willingness to link dots. People regularly interpret random license plate digits or letters as personal messages. Years ago, I wrote about an odd synchronicity in my own online journal. I'd just watched a DVD preview for Peaceful Warrior based on Dan Millman's life. Later that day, a friend unexpectedly asked me about Millman's books. Then, out of the blue, Dan Millman himself wrote me, asking permission to cite my work in his new memoir. I granted permission and noted the odd timing of these 3 events. Had I wanted to, I could have devised some probability scale to highlight how these 3 events, watching the trailer, being asked about Millman, then receiving his letter, defy chance. Yet this would be a post hoc calculation, shaped by my own desire to see meaning. It's why double-blind experiments are so crucial in science. They help prevent biases from creeping in. Rather than relying on his personal numbering systems, Eliot would do better to involve impartial experts in a controlled study. But in the specific examples he gives, and in my own anecdotes, that's unlikely. We remain stuck mixing our subjective meaning-seeking with our desire to discover something transcendent. Indeed, it's possible to find far more astonishing tales of coincidences than license plate sightings. Stories that still can be explained by the intersection of probability and human pattern-seeking. Our predisposition to impose meaning, especially under emotional stress, is a universal human trait. The details, ironically, highlight how we shape these miracles. Sandra L. Hubscher writes, in Apophenia, Definition and Analysis. Early 20th century Swedish playwright August Strindberg documented in Inferno from an occult diary what might now be diagnosed as schizophrenia. On the ground, I found 2 twigs shaped like the Greek letters P and Y. I took this as Popovsky and was sure he was persecuting me and that some higher power wanted to warn me. Strindberg wasn't hallucinating, but over-interpreting random coincidences. Klaus Conrad, in 1958, coined this phenomenon apophenia, the unmotivated perception of connections with a sense of abnormal meaningfulness. Modern examples are so numerous and familiar. The Bible Code, the grilled cheese, Virgin Mary, reversed messages in Led Zeppelin's music, the face on Mars, that we scarcely need repetition. Before concluding, I acknowledge Eliot might dismiss my arguments as too scientistic or reductionistic. Yet David Hume's dictum still holds. Is the universe bending the laws of nature for our birthdays or job losses, or is something simpler at work? I'm inclined to believe simpler explanations suffice. In more optimistic terms, I challenge those who believe in supernatural synchronicities to strengthen their case with more compelling examples, and also fulfill Pierre-Simon Laplace's principle. The weight of evidence for an extraordinary claim must be proportioned to its strangeness. Eliot Benjamin's coincidences, by that measure, are not unusual enough to invoke the transcendental, nor is the evidence solid enough to convince us that more than chance is happening. Just as I typed these lines, my wife and kids disrupted me by playing the children's card game, War. I offhandedly told them about Apophenia and half-seriously said, I predict the next card is a 5. It was a 5, sparking surprised laughter. Indeed, it was fun, but not a sign of cosmic design. Afterwards, though, a tiny voice in my mind jokingly considered hopping into my car to go look for new license plate signs. Final remarks. I owe Eliot Benjamin an apology for misspelling his name, with one L instead of 2 earlier. If I had to defend the slip, I might invoke my Occam's razor approach to spelling, meaning I try not to add extra letters. This partly explains why I tend to write Occam, with 5 letters, over the more common Occam, with 6, which, to me, violates the principle of parsimony. I do know of one especially strange desultory decussation that might be deemed precognitive or a self-fulfilling prophecy. Years ago, while on sabbatical in London, I needed to slip away to France and Switzerland for personal reasons, but could not disclose the truth. So I concocted a wild story about a US cult deprogrammer seeking my expertise on a guru named Thakur Singh, saying I'd be flown to Greece, all expenses paid plus $1,000 a day. Of course, I never went to Greece. After eventually telling my friends that I had really been in Paris and Interlaken, I thought the matter was closed. Several years later, I got an unexpected phone call from a real US cult deprogrammer asking if I could help extricate someone's father from a dangerous guru's influence. Which guru? I asked. Thakur Singh, he replied, will fly you abroad to meet the client. Where? I asked sheepishly. Greece. We only need you for a week or 2. He also offered to pay all expenses plus $1,000 a day. I declined, but I was amazed by how perfectly my previous fiction lined up with a future reality. However, this still need not be seen as transcendent. Coincidences, though rare, do occur. As a high school sophomore, my friends and I would open a Bible at random after asking a question. Where should we take our girlfriends this weekend? We invariably found passages that seemed to address our teenage concerns. Did that mean the Bible was answering us? Not necessarily. It just illustrates how adept humans are at finding meaning in almost anything. My late friend, Paul Tuhar, once joked that if you gave the guru Charan Singh a copy of Cosmopolitan magazine, he'd find some passages relating to the Santmat practice of Surat Shabd Yoga. Our intentionality is so potent, we can discover diamonds in mud, sometimes even when the diamonds and the mud aren't there at all. 3. Voodoo and 2 more waves. I appreciated M.A. Rose's response to our article, Desultory Decussation. I understand his skepticism about our apparent dismissal of Elliot Benjamin's license plate stories. Yet in my follow-up, Apophenia and the intentionality fallacy, I noted, I appreciate Elliot Benjamin's effort to justify his belief in mysterious synchronicities. I partly agree with him because a detailed look at his license plate scenarios shows a simpler explanation. Contrary to Elliot's argument, his details reveal that the major factor in these so-called spiritual intersections is his wish to see meaning in random occurrences. In other words, our critique did not require invoking Littlewood's law at all. As we argued, a close reading of Benjamin's first 4 license plate coincidences reveals more about his mindset than about any transmundane phenomenon. Ironically, the math he cites is something of a decoy. Probability is not the issue. His drive to find patterns is. Whether or not M.A. Rose agrees, I'm glad he keeps the conversation on desultory decussation going. These questions, arising from the theory of large numbers and how apparently impossible overlaps occur, are profoundly interesting and relevant to parapsychological discussions. Coincidentally, the day I read M.A. Rose's response, I had just finished an essay describing a process akin to Littlewood's law, or desultory decussation, that may connect to our awareness of meaningful correlations arising from one moment to the next. I share it here, hoping it adds to this lively debate. The magical chant. Our voodoo chant might have started at Coral Beach in Malibu, or perhaps Drainpipe at Zuma Ortiz at Santa Monica, but my memory points to Coral. The ocean was nearly flat, and I was bobbing around with my longtime friends Pat Donahue, Joe DiChiaro, and Rob Gilmore. We were 13 or 14, attempting to body surf despite no waves. Suddenly, someone in our group came up with a fun chant, apparently improvised on the spot. Voodoo, voodoo, and 2 more waves. You know we need them, and we need them today. We began chanting and splashing while laughing at how silly we looked. Incredibly, a set of waves rose from the horizon. Pat caught the first wave. The rest of us rode the second, which was a bit bigger. After that, the ocean went flat again. Right then and there, we deemed voodoo voodoo a magic mantra, and used it whenever we were desperate for waves. Of course, we never truly believed it had power, yet time after time, there seemed to be a quirky synchronicity. I bring this up because this past summer, my family and I vacationed in Waikiki. The surf had been unusually good for most of our stay, until the last day, when it went dead flat. With nothing to ride, I decided to paddle out with my 5-year-old son Kelly, thinking we'd just enjoy the view and look for turtles. We ventured pretty far, out to a spot called Pops, short for Populars, on the off chance a tiny wave might appear. Kelly quickly noticed how calm everything was. Disappointed, he asked why we couldn't surf together. I explained that no meaningful swell was hitting, so the waves rolling through were too weak to break. Seeing his sad face, I recalled my old surf chant from childhood. I embellished the tale with Neptune myths, bubble-blowing storms and so forth, hooking Kelly's imagination. He was enthralled. "Let's do it, Papa," he urged. I hesitated, because I was sure the chant wouldn't work, and I didn't want him sulking if no waves came. But he pressed. We began, with much drama. Voodoo, voodoo, and 2 more waves. You know we need them, and we need them today. We stressed the final today in a sing-song manner. To my astonishment, a set of waves, a good 3 times bigger than anything we had seen, popped up right after we finished. Kelly and I paddled only a stroke or 2, and glided down the first wave, riding for nearly 100 yards, cheering the whole way. Then the sea returned to its glassy calm. Kelly, excited, immediately wanted to chant again. I tried explaining that we shouldn't overuse the magic, lest it lose its punch, but he persisted. This time we chanted more loudly, as I claimed Neptune might be hard of hearing. Truthfully, I expected nothing. Yet, again, A bigger set suddenly showed on the horizon. We dropped into the face with no effort, riding left, almost to shore. This happened again and again, each time leaving Kelly squealing with delight. Later that night, over pizza at Il Lupino, he asked me why our magic mantra worked. I told him and my older son Sean about the mathematician G.E. Littlewood, whose studies suggest that improbable miracles can happen at a rate of about once a month, simply by virtue of the vast number of events we experience. I mentioned my own idea, desultory decussation, but that was too detailed for Kelly. So I simplified. Sometimes, random events line up in ways that appear magical. It's the nature of probability. We tend to forget all the times we chanted and nothing happened, and remember only the hits. Kelly responded, "So it's not that King Neptune is asleep or can't hear us. Voodoo wakes us up to see the waves, right?" "Precisely," I answered, smiling at his insight. Voodoo and 2 more waves. You know we need them. And we need them today. The Littlewood game. At that point, I realized Littlewood's miracle a month idea could become a sort of personal game. The more aware we stay of desultory decussation, where 2 random events cross to form an X, the more we'll notice synchronous events that feel miraculous. Many coincidences elude us simply because we're not looking. Perhaps the real power in these rituals is how they awaken our minds to nature's underlying probability flows, like buying a ticket so we can't lose out on the lottery by failing to play. In that sense, our chanting surfers weren't literally summoning waves from Neptune. Rather, the chant forced us to open our eyes to the ocean's possibilities, leading us to catch any promising bump on the horizon. That's the true voodoo magic, awareness. 4. The numbered universe. First, I thank Elliot Benjamin for engaging with my essay, Apophenia and the Intentionality Fallacy. I enjoy reflecting on his reasons for believing that license plate synchronicities may demand a deeper explanation. Before addressing 2 major themes, his probability approach and his mention of quantum entanglement, I decided to replicate his experiment, focusing on the number 496. Recalling Ken Wilber's point about experiential knowledge in eye to eye, I said to myself, let's see if I can find 496 out in the world. Rather than looking at license plates first, I grabbed a random receipt from Don Diego's Mexican restaurant in Indian Wells, and immediately spotted the digits 496. Surprised, I had to pay my pool man next, so I fetched my checkbook from the car. The next check I happened to pull out was number 496. Then, glancing at my driver's license, I realized my birth date is April 29th, 1956. If you take the last digit of each chunk, you get 4, 9, and 6. I started to feel like Rod Serling was going to appear and introduce me to the Twilight Zone. However, unlike Elliot, I wasn't limiting myself strictly to license plates. I then wondered if maybe I should check the DMV directly. Typing DMV into a search engine, one of the first results showed NC license plate agency call 919-496-4655, again 496. Was my life turning into a chain of coincidences? Did I suddenly tap into the same phenomenon Elliot describes? The reality is simpler. Once you focus on a particular number or pattern, you notice it all around you, a perfect mix of probability and intentionality. Everyone who tries a similar exercise, with time and attention, will see comparable results. Elliot suggests that encountering 496 has a probability too small for chance alone. He writes, I was back in the Caribbean, past a few cars, and the first license plate I noticed was 4696. I estimated the odds at about 1 in 2,000. Then a few minutes later, I saw 496 on a novelty plate stacked in a shop, which I pegged at 1 in 385 10,000. Since these 2 events are independent, multiplying yields 1 2,000th times 1 10,000th equals 1 20 millionth, hence 1 in 20 million. It's this sort of calculation that keeps me open to alternative, possibly spiritual explanations. Yet there are several challenges to Elliott's math. Accurate probability demands precise parameters. Which number is Elliott looking for before he starts? Does he look at many plates, discarding non-hits, then highlight hits after the fact? Also, a license plate with 6 to 7 characters might easily contain 496 in one of its subsets. The actual likelihood is not so miraculous, especially once you search long enough. A helpful analogy is the birthday paradox, where the chance of any two people in a 30-person class sharing the same birthday is surprisingly high, about 70%. Our intuition often misunderstands odds with multiple placeholders. Further, Elliott's approach is post hoc, not a priori, so he can't objectively track the total number of non-hits. Earlier today, for instance, my wife Andrea and I ate lunch at Native Foods in Palm Desert. While she answered emails, I decided to look for two vehicles sporting the same 3 consecutive digits in their plates, side by side. Amazingly, within a few seconds, I spotted a pair of cars parked right next to each other, each including 895 in sequence. I snapped photos for proof. It felt uncanny, yet no quantum entanglement is needed. Basic probability and our pattern-seeking brains explain the event. I appreciate Elliott's spark of curiosity, and I understand how significant these experiences feel. Yet they do not require spooky action at a distance. In the same way, true psychic powers would be more than a curiosity. We'd all be using them at casinos. Sadly, it never works that way. Finally, it's wise to remember that once a number infects your brain, you'll see it everywhere. Jorge Luis Borges, in The Zahir, illustrates how an image, once lodged in our mind, occupies all our attention. Elliott's 496 is precisely that kind of number, and so was mine for a day or so. 5. You are probability. Mathematics takes us into the realm of absolute necessity, to which not just the actual world, but every possible world must conform. Bertrand Russell. Scanning the room after nearly 2 hours of lecturing on quantum theory, desultory decussation, and Stephen Wolfram's new kind of science, I saw some of my students' eyes glaze over. Apparently the profound implications of chance and necessity, the topic of Jacques Monod's classic book, felt too abstract for them. To wake them up, I posed a lottery scenario. Imagine you have a California scratchers ticket. During class, you uncover the numbers and discover you've won $5 million. What do you do next? The prospect of beating 1 in 2.4 million odds immediately rivets everyone's attention. Then I point out that winning $5 million is trivial compared to the odds of being alive at all, reading this very sentence. This is where the theory of large numbers becomes personally astonishing. You, as a human being, already beat longer odds than any lottery ever offered. Consider your father's sperm. A single ejaculation typically contains 100 million sperm cells. Only one fertilizes an egg. Over a man's lifetime, he might produce roughly 500 billion sperm. If he has 5 children, each child, in simplistic terms, overcame 1 in 100 billion odds. Then add your mother's side. Of her 500,000 follicles, perhaps around 400 mature into viable eggs. Factor in your entire ancestral line, and you see how your existence quickly becomes astronomically unlikely. Trace the chain back 85,000 years to humanity's African origins, or billions of years to the first life forms, and it grows ever more mind-boggling. And that's not even counting the cosmic scale, nearly 14 billion years of universal history that created the atoms in your body. Some viral infographics, what are the odds, claim the probability of your being alive right now is far smaller than the total number of particles in the universe, suggesting that life itself, particularly conscious life, looks like it was intended. Fred Hoyle famously argued, "If one tries to proceed straightforwardly, without fear of contradicting scientific opinion, one concludes that biomaterials with their astonishing degree of order must be the result of an intelligent design." William Dembski, an advocate of intelligent design, puts it similarly. Some natural systems cannot be adequately explained by undirected forces. They exhibit features that, in any other context, we would immediately recognize as the product of intelligence. Others see no intentional design, merely chance. Alan Lightman's The Accidental Universe advocates this view. As Laura Miller writes in her Salon.com review, the notion of a multiverse can also refute intelligent design. If there are countless universes, each with different configurations, then the fact that ours is fine-tuned for life isn't so special. We happen to live in the one that suits us. By definition, we wouldn't be here in universes that aren't. Regardless, evolution is a universal Hunger Games. That our genetic code persists testifies to its adaptability, but randomness also plays a powerful role. Life itself is rare and fleeting, an ongoing rebellion against the second law of thermodynamics. In a sense, you are a probability avatar. It's as if you and I are winners of a cosmic poker game that no one realized was being played, and certainly not played with open eyes. Some thinkers suggest the universe might indeed be structured by mathematics in such a deep way that everything we see is essentially numbers in motion. MIT's Max Tegmark proposes the mathematical universe hypothesis, MUH, asserting our reality isn't just described by mathematics, it is mathematics, in a strict sense. Imagine your smartphone. You interact with the user-friendly interface, oblivious to the complex software below. That software is itself an intricate arrangement of binary code, powered by electrical bits off or on in integrated circuits. Similarly, what if physical reality is the surface interface for an underlying matrix of geometry and mathematical relationships? Far from new, this echoes ideas from Pythagoras to Plato. Even Einstein's theory of relativity is best understood as geometry describing gravity. Quantum mechanics, meanwhile, embraces probabilistic outcomes at the fundamental level, reinforcing the notion that math rules everything at its core. As Tegmark notes, look around. Do you see repeating shapes? Throw a pebble. The path of its arc is a parabola. Planets revolve in ellipses. Nature abounds in recurring patterns. It is possible that everything emerges from relationships between mathematical structures, rather than from any inherent properties of material building blocks. So, might the real world be code? Possibly. Whether Tegmark is correct, his argument resonates with our digital age. We recognize that beneath our apps and icons is pure computation. Similarly, what we see as everyday objects might be manifestations of a deeper mathematical base. Tegmark concludes, "If my career as a physicist has taught me anything, it's that Plato was right. Modern physics has made it abundantly clear that the nature of reality isn't what it seems." Relaying this to my students often ignites a fresh appreciation for how precious and improbable their existence is. Why studying large numbers and probabilities is just as vital as reading classic literature. The more we learn, the more we realize the universe is not how it appears at a glance. You are here against colossal odds, on a planet full of ephemeral yet extraordinary life forms. Understanding the mathematics that underpins it all might even help us treasure our finite time. 6. Surfing the matrix. Which is more likely, that the universe was designed just for us, or that it looks designed for us because we exist? Michael Shermer. Was the universe intentionally designed? Are its physical laws a recipe for life? Or is everything accidental, a chance interplay of blind forces in space-time? Strangely enough, these thoughts re-emerged as I watched the final event of the 2013 Vans Triple Crown of Surfing at the Banzai Pipeline on Oahu's North Shore. The ASP World Championship came down to Kelly Slater versus Mick Fanning. Slater, the greatest competitive surfer in history, would secure his 12th world title if he won the Pipeline Masters and if Fanning was stopped before the semi-finals. On the concluding day, Fanning first had to defeat CJ Hobgood to keep his dream alive. Hobgood led until the final 90 seconds, when Fanning found a perfect wave, scoring 9.50 out of 10. The beach went wild, but Fanning still needed to beat Yadin Nicole in the quarterfinals. Again, Nicole dominated for most of the heat, leaving Fanning needing a near-perfect 9.57 in the last 2 minutes. Suddenly yet another pristine wave materialized. Fanning caught it for a 9.70. He earned his 3rd world title on 2 last-second waves that felt downright miraculous. Even he commented, "The waves showed up at about the same time at the end of each heat, so I don't know who sent them. But thank you." That phrase, "who sent them," captures our instinct to see larger meaning in improbable moments. If not for those 2 waves, Slater might have claimed yet another world title, which would have seemed equally meant to be. Yet Fanning's timing, combined with skill and a dash of luck, was undeniable. But were those waves actually sent? Number meteorology says these waves were generated by a Pacific storm possibly thousands of miles away. The contest organizers knew from Surfline forecasts exactly which day to hold the event. Waves arrived steadily throughout. Yet the drama soared, because Fanning got exactly what he needed just in time. Twice. On a deeper level, this scenario mirrors the cosmological debate between the strong anthropic principle, the universe is carefully tuned for life, and a more contingent view, our presence here reflects random chance or membership in a broader multiverse. Observers might say Fanning's 2 waves were destined, while probability and context say otherwise. Likewise, if the universe's constants seem fine-tuned for intelligent life, are we gazing at an intentional script, or are we simply the lucky ones who happen to find ourselves here? In short, Fanning's improbable wave scores highlight the same tension. Without broader context, like the large-scale storm system, the entire day's wave sets, and the format of the contest, we might impute a mystical explanation. But zooming out, we see a synergy of natural forces and individual skill. The improbable is not necessarily the miraculous. Improbable events happen often given enough tries. Therefore, echoing Fanning, we might say regarding the broader cosmos, I don't know who or what brought us here, but thank you. Ultimately, as unlikely as 2 perfect pipeline waves in the final minute may seem, those odds are minuscule compared to the odds against our own existence, and we have the remarkable ability to notice and reflect on it. It can be comforting to imagine a divine mind orchestrating everything, yet that does not make it proven. Our biologically ingrained need to detect patterns and attribute them to agency can mislead us. Meanwhile, science continues to expand our horizon of understanding, reminding us that any map we create of reality remains incomplete next to the territory it attempts to describe. There is a coherent plan in the universe, though I don't know what it's a plan for. Fred Hoyle.